So I'm sitting here in my dining room just thinking I might just go ahead and talk to you a little bit about something interesting. Now, I know that I have kind of an interesting perspective about Kansas City, and the reason why is because I actually grew up in a suburb about 45 minutes away from Kansas City called Leavenworth. And not only that, but I've also moved around some. I'm a pastor's kid and I grew up moving around just a little bit. Was born in Oklahoma, I've lived in New Mexico, I've lived in Denver, and then when I was in the second grade, we kind of landed in Leavenworth. And we lived there until I was about sophomore in high school. And then we moved to Texas. So I've lived in all of those states early on. I don't really remember a lot of them, but vaguely remember some things. But I do remember Texas. And then right after graduation, we moved back here. I got my associate's degree and then I moved to New York. Believe it or not, I was a flight attendant. And so when I was a flight attendant, I lived there, traveled, and have had some experiences with living in other places. When I came back, I actually worked for TWA. TWA kind of dates me because of that, but I was a flight attendant for TWA, an international flight attendant, and then when they folded, I lost my job. I moved back to Kansas City, and so I went on to the University of Kansas and I lived in Lawrence. So the reality of it is I've lived in multiple different states and kind of have a different perspective on that. But once I graduated, I decided to live in the metropolitan area. So I lived in Kansas City and have some kind of perspective of that, because also I've lived on both the Missouri side as well as the Kansas side. I've lived in Lenexa, I rented an apartment there, I rented a house in Overland Park. I also rented a house in Kansas City, Missouri, in the heart of Kansas City, Missouri. Then we bought our house in Shawnee. I've also purchased a home on the Missouri side in Blue Springs. And so I've lived in multiple different cities on the Kansas side and several on the Missouri side, as well as moving around. And so, you know, it's been interesting how this perspective can bring to help you guys. Then once I figured out that this was home to me, I've not really ever considered moving anywhere else. I mean, I have family in other states, but just the season that I have right now isn't moving away to one of those. And so I've often kind of had this perspective of this has just been my home. And so I love it here, and yet there's also some quirky things about it that people just don't tell you about. So I'm gonna tell you some things about Kansas City in this video. If you're considering moving here, you just might wanna be aware of, okay? The other thing too is that with all of that being said, I've had several seasons of my life here. I mean, like, I've been single here. I've gone through the single mom phase, marriage life, family life, sports life, you know, all of that here. So now it's all just a matter of perspective. So if we haven't met, my name is Anita Cordell and I tell videos about Kansas City. I live here, breathe here, eat here, sleep here. I mean, all of it. And so I want to explain to you some of those things. And also too, I want to invite you to write comments in the sections below. And those comments are things that you wish I would talk about, or things that you want me to cover, things that you want me to highlight. Maybe there's a city or a suburb or something that you want me to go and highlight. I would be more than happy to do that. So please write down in the comments section below. And also in the description below, there's going to be my contact information, so you can obviously get on my calendar and we can talk about your real estate goals and what have you. All right, so let's get started on the things that people don't talk about when they're describing Kansas City. So number one thing that I wish that people would highlight a little bit more is the weather. And I'm gonna tell you this, that people think that Kansas City is this brutal winter weather, and it's really not. Our winters are not that bad. When we are in the middle of winter, it is very cold, obviously. It is cold, and yet there's only really maybe 4 to 5 days that a child might miss in school. It's not this, you know, storms all over and winter all over, and it isn't that way. They're not as brutal as what people might think. Now, when I was growing up, I distinctly remember one winter storm that we got stuck in. And the reason why I say that is because most winters we just don't remember how bad or good they are because they're not that bad, and so therefore we don't remember. But there's one instance where growing up I do remember, and it was when I was probably fresh out of high school, I think, and we had just moved back here, and it was the winter time, and there was this huge ice storm, and we got caught in downtown Kansas City. I have no idea how we got caught there without knowing all of this, but I think there was a convention that we were going through around November time. It was around Thanksgiving, and there happened to be this big, huge storm going on, and we got caught in it. I distinctly remember the streets were horrible. They were icy. I was afraid that we would not make it home. We did. Have I remembered any other really bad winter since then? I can't say that I have. So yes, we have snow, but here's the thing. We have all 4 seasons. And so one of the things that they don't talk about with Kansas City is just how wonderful having 4 seasons is. I mean, we've got the rain in the spring and it brings up the flowers. We do have sun in the summer. You can go to the lakes. We have fall, which is amazing and beautiful, and the leaves change. And then we have the winter time where it's snowy sometimes, and then there's winter activities that you can see. Boy, we have it all. We have all 4 seasons, and yes, let's talk about tornadoes. We do have tornadoes. Now, I will tell you this, that I have not ever actually seen a tornado. Have I been in tornado storms or tornado watches and have heard the sirens going off? Absolutely, I have heard that. However, I've not ever seen a tornado, and I've lived here most of my life. That's the one thing that, people think Kansas and the Wizard of Oz and there's all these tornadoes out. I have not seen one. There are some there. Another thing too to note is daylight savings time. So our days are a lot shorter than other states. So that's one thing that people just aren't fully aware of. But it starts to get dark at 5 to 6 o'clock in the evening when we're in that daylight savings time. And so as a real estate agent, it's hard to show homes when it's cold out and it gets dark at 5 o'clock at night, and people want to see the home in the daytime. It makes it a little bit less exciting to get out and do things. And so therefore people get a little unmotivated. They get lackadaisical during that time frame. But let me tell you this, when spring and summer come, watch out. People come out of the woodwork and there's all kinds of things to do. There are things to do. We even have a ladies' Facebook activities group. We have gyms. If you're a sports family, there's always something to do if you're a sports family. We have a lot of churches, and if you get involved with churches, they're constantly having activities, especially small groups and things like that. We have a ski slope that you can go to in the winter time. There's all kinds of lakes you can go fishing on. Our entertainment world here in Kansas City is top notch in my opinion. There's all kinds of things to do. Not to mention the farmers markets. The farmers markets are growing and they're getting bigger. So the weather, yes, but it's not as horrible as what people think. The number 2 thing that surprises me that Kansas City is not necessarily spotlighted about is the cost of living. I mean, I hear in other cities how that somebody has to pay $3,000 to $5,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment. Here, you're not going to have to do that. That is not the case here. For a 1-bedroom apartment, you might have to spend maybe $1,500, depending on the city that you're in, but average of $1,500. It's not that bad. So then the other thing is you might have to go to another city and the average sales price be, say, $700,000 to $1 million or $600,000 to $1 million for a typical 3-bedroom home. That's not the case here either. The average sales price here in Kansas City is roughly just shy of $400,000. From a cost of living perspective, I don't think people talk about it as much. They're not telling you the cost of living in Kansas City is a lot cheaper than other areas in the United States. Like for instance, if you go and you buy a cup of coffee somewhere, you might spend about $5. In other cities, I've heard it $8 or $9 just to get a little 12-ounce cup of coffee. Overall, I think that Kansas City is a great place to consider when you're talking about cost of living and you're wanting your dollar to just move a little farther. Number 3 on things that they just don't tell you about Kansas City is visual aid of it, or visual side of it. So there's all kinds of lakes, like I mentioned before. There's lakes, there's all kinds of things to do. There's beautiful trees out. I mean, you should see fall here. It is absolutely gorgeous. But one of the things that is interesting and that you have to be intentional about is the architectural design here. What do I mean by that? So if you are wanting a Tudor style home then you're going to have to be very intentional about the area that you want to live in with getting a Tudor style home. Like you're going to have to go to Waldo or Brookside or some of those subdivisions right around like the State Line Road and 55th Street to 42nd Street. There's all kinds of Tudor style homes there, and they're the older style homes. However, if you want to live in the suburbs with a Tudor style home, it's not going to happen. You're just not going to find a Tudor style home in, say, Blue Springs or Shawnee or what. It's very rare, and that is just the facts. So when it comes to that, I wish that there could be more newer style homes that are that Tudor style home design. It's interesting because when you go to like New York, it's easy to think of New York as brownstones. Or if you go to like San Francisco, then it's easy to think about Victorian style homes. Or if you go to certain parts of Virginia, it's easy to think, oh, those are colonial style homes. It's not the case here in Kansas City. We're kind of like all over the board. We're like a mutt in a sense. I know this is like really silly to think about and to even talk about, but what they don't tell you is our city is really diverse when it comes to the styles of the home. And you have to be intentional about it. I've had buyers come into town and they say, I want a Tudor style home and I want to live in Lee Summit. It's just not going to happen. Just keeping in mind that when you're looking for properties, you're going to have to be very intentional about the area that you live in, especially if you have your heart set on a certain style of home. That's just one of the things about Kansas City. You know, it's very common to see raised ranches. I mean, raised ranches are a pretty popular floor plan here in Kansas City, and they're found all across the city, but it's not like Kansas City is known for raised ranches. It's just a style of home. Number 4 is very interesting. I talk about this on some of my other videos, but the number 4 thing that I'm going to talk about when it comes to things that people don't tell you when you're moving to Kansas City is that Kansas City is actually one of the few metropolitan cities that actually sits on 2 states. We actually have 2 Kansas Cities. We have a Kansas City, Kansas, and we have a Kansas City, Missouri. And people don't know that. Most of the time, people don't know. They think that Kansas City is just all of it, including the suburbs, but it's something just to know. So they don't really tell you and explain to you that it sits on 2 different states. And so you have to decide, do I want to live on the Kansas side or do I want to live on the Missouri side? And I'm going to tell you this, it's a very quirky thing, but people who live in Kansas, they view Missourians as like these rough, gritty people that, I don't know. And I think it's just a stereotype thing. I'm not sure where it comes from, other than they think that Kansas City, Missouri is all of Jackson County. And that's not true. I mean, people think that, you know, Missourians, I guess, carry guns around and knives around and then they're hunters. I don't know. But then the Missourians view Kansans as snobbish. So it's like there's these 2 different perspectives and 2 different viewpoints, and they're both great people. They're both great places. I've lived on both sides of the state line and I have perspective of that. So number 5 is what they don't tell you about Kansas City is the traffic. Driving here is not that big of a deal. In fact, given perspective, like we are not a Dallas, we are not an Atlanta, we are not a LA, we're not a San Francisco. We're just not that big of a city to have the stresses that those cities have. So the traffic is not all that bad. Driving around, it takes about 45 minutes to get from one side of the state line to the other. For the most part, people are pretty safe. There are some people who try and push the limit, and I really don't like that. But there's one quirk about the driving that just drives me bananas. It's called our zip method, okay? Missouri Department of Transportation, the MoDOT, actually wants their drivers to practice the zip method. And for whatever reason, drivers will not do it. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically when you're driving down the highway and you know that one of the lanes is closing, early on, like 3 miles ahead, there might be a sign. 2 miles ahead, there might be a sign that says lane closing. What people do here is they go ahead and get into that other lane, and that is not what MoDOT wants us to do. MoDOT recommends us do the zip method, which means that if you're in the lane that is closing, drive all the way to the very end and mesh into the traffic. It's the zipper method, and they even have it on their website. Please use the zip method. Well, what happens is people get crazy. Like, I'm telling you what, they get very, very territorial about people moving up and going forward and following along MoDOT's recommendations of the zip form. In fact, there are some people who will move out of their lane and block the closing lane and not let people go all the way forward. In fact, I have a story. My husband did this. Now I don't think he disagrees with me, but at the time he did, and he pulled out into that lane in a big truck and blocked the people from behind from going forward because he was protective of all the people that had already moved into the lane. Well, he got a ticket. And I was like, told ya, MoDOT wants us to do the zip method. And so I can preach this all day long. It's just so funny. People literally, they lose their mind. When I've been blocked, when I go up and try, I've been blocked. So anyway, you have to know this. You have to be aware. But please, if you're on and you're watching this, just do the zip method. It makes life so much easier. Studies do show that traffic moves faster if you practice the zip method. So anyway, that's just one thing they don't tell you about. When moving to Kansas City, we have our driving quirks. Number 6, and what they don't tell you about Kansas City, is the diverseness when it comes to health lifestyles. So obviously when it's wintertime and the sun is down and people are kind of like wanting to have their cozy feel-good foods and they're living in their house, and you know, they're not probably going to order that smoothie. They're going to order the pizza and the comfort foods and all these things. It makes it very difficult to eat healthy in some instances. However, there is a growing number of health restaurants. There's a growing number of health communities. There's a growing number of farmers markets. There's a growing number of these places that you can eat with health on the menus. In fact, the Overland Park Farmers Market is ranked as one of the top farmers markets in the nation. So if you are into health, you're gonna have to be intentional about it. There's places like The Mix, that's super cool. I love that restaurant. It's so healthy. There's also smoothie shops. There's also a restaurant called True Kitchen. It's downtown on the Country Club Plaza. And there's a lot of other restaurants that are popping up. So be sure and just look for those health options. I feel that Kansas City is starting to get more health conscious, and yet there's still moments in time where we eat junk. Number 7, things that people aren't telling you about Kansas City. And this all deals with the fashion. I mean, the lifestyle as a whole. So I'm going to be honest with you. I love dressing up. I love fashion. I'm a little more on the casual side. I'm getting ready to go out and just have a fun time. But I'm just telling you that it's interesting because there's pockets of Kansas City that are really, really fashionable. And then there's a vast majority of Kansas City that's just super casual. I mean, you might see people out in jeans and a sweatshirt and no big deal. And case in point, you might be going to a really nice restaurant and you might be all dressed up to the hilt and have a wonderful evening planned with celebration and anniversary or birthday or something, and you're dressed up at this fine dining place, and then right next to you in another table is somebody wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. It happens. I like to dress up. I like to have a sense of fashion in and of itself, but it's not necessarily always the case here in Kansas City. So if you like fashion, you're just going to have to find those certain pockets of places where more people dress up, or you're just going to have to be okay with sticking out, and that has to be me. I have to just be okay with sticking out. Okay, so these are 7 things that people just don't talk about, or that people just, you know, kind of assume that everybody knows. And I hope that this helps you as you feel and fit in with Kansas City and just those few little quirky things. These are just 7 things that people really don't talk about. And I hope that this video helps you. So if it did, be sure and like it, give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking to buy or sell, call Anita Cordell. And also too, be sure and pop something into the comments below. Also in the description below is my contact information, as well as a link to my calendar where you can set up a time to schedule with me and we can talk about your real estate goals. And if you're looking to binge on more Kansas City content, be sure share, and subscribe to my channel. And as always, go out and live your best Kansas City life.